Welcome to another episode of the MacGuffin podcast, the movie review podcast that dreams are made of. With me, as always, is Keith Foster from San Diego, California.
And you are Cassidy Robinson. You are recording from an undisclosed location in the Rocky Mountains.
And by the time this episode comes out, we will be in the beginnings of the spooky season.
Hell yeah.
We're going to talk about...
My body is ready.
Your body is a wonderland for ghosts.
And skeletons and goblins.
We're going to be talking about The Haunting in Venice, the new film by Kenneth Branagh, in the Agatha Christie series that he's been doing. And at the end of the program, we will be reviewing Ang Lee's The Ice Storm and talk about the dread and horror of suburban angst in the 70s.
I mean, we'll get to the review, but it was way more of a fall movie than I expected, and damn, those 70s fall fits.
Yeah.
I was like, Elijah Wood is serving in this movie.
All right. Yeah, hold your thoughts on that.
I'm just saying, it's purely costume design.
This will be out at the first week of October. So, have you started to christen your media consumption with spooky season stuff, or have you dipped your toes? Outside of podcast?
Yes, kind of. I started a little early this year. I don't know if it was kind of for Halloween. Me and some friends watched The Evil Dead Rise, which came out earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios in LA, and they are doing an Evil Dead Rise maze, like Spook House, and so we watched that. I actually watched. I think it's going to be an Evil Dead year. I watched I think it was the 2013 remake, reboot.
The Fede Alvarez one.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm ready for the spooks.
Yeah, I would say you're fully in. I mean, I watched some commentary stuff on Barbarian.
Okay.
And I would like to watch that again this fall or this October. I'm not sure where
Disney
released
that physical Blu-ray at Disney.
Yeah, well, I would like them to release the rights at the very least, so somebody like a Shout Factory or something could release it. That would be cool. I would like that. And most recently, this isn't... I would say this is like adjacent to spooky.
Okay.
But have you ever listened to the music of Ethel Cain?
It does not trigger me.
Okay, she's a singer-songwriter. And she had an album out last year called Preacher's Daughter. She's from the Deep South, and she has...
sold. I'm already, like... You know me, I'm a sucker for, like, gothic, folky, bluesy stuff.
Yes, I would say that she's very much in that camp of, like, the Southern Gothic is sort of her obsession. I mean, she has songs that are just, like... The Preacher's Daughter is a concept album about a girl who runs away from home, and ends up on the road with a dangerous man, and may or may not end in cannibalism.
Okay, so it's bones and all.
She wrote a song for the movie, actually. Yeah. Yeah, that is kind of.
They're like, damn, our movie is just this album. We gotta cross promote synergy.
Right, but she's really it's very kind of haunting. Lots of like dreamy, reverby type stuff. And sometimes it can be really lush and beautiful. And sometimes it can be really creepy and demonic.
What's the meme? The Tobey Maguire meme? Like, you don't have to sell me on it. I'm already in.
I would definitely recommend that album. I was watching somebody who was talking it up, and they were explaining sort of the story of the album, and I went and listened to it, and yeah, it's on top of being very good music, it's very moving. It's also kind of creepy and haunting, and lives in that sort of Nick Cave-y sort of universe. Let's go ahead and just start talking about A Haunting in Venice. So, as stated before, this is the film by Kenneth Branagh, the third in a series he's done, starting in 2017 with a remake of Murder on the Orient Express. Last year, he released Death on the Nile.
Yeah, the most canceled cast of all time.
Is it? I don't even remember.
Both Armie Hammer and Russell Brand are in that movie.
Oh, speaking of cannibals, yeah.
Yeah.
And this year he's released A Haunting in Venice, which takes place sometime after the heroics of Detective Hercule Poirot, which is the main character of these Agatha Christie novels.
I was also in a production of Murder on the Orient Express a couple years ago.
Right.
Yeah, so he's this famous Belgian detective who got famous because of these Agatha Christie novels, and then they started getting adapted into plays, and then eventually movies.
Right. I know Sidney Lumet did a version in the 70s or 80s of Murder on the Orient Express, and then the remake. I think these movies must have done pretty well for them to have made 3 of them.
Yeah, I mean, Kenneth Branagh has been around for a while, right?
Yeah,
yeah, and I am pretty sure he's a producer on all these movies. So, like, I think they're just kind of his sort of retirement passion project, and they're making enough money to justify it. But I'm pretty sure I can't speak to this one, but I'm pretty sure the other 2 were pretty big like successes. Murder on the Orient Express, I think, made quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I think there might be some diminishing returns per movie. But I know also he had released the film Belfast, which was like his personal biography that was nominated for Best Picture, somewhere in the making of these films as well. So
yeah.
But anyway, the story of this one is this takes place sometime after Hercule Poirot retires as a detective. And he goes to live in Venice and feed the birds and work on his garden and tries to stay away from all things mystery related until a young author played by Tina Fey, kind of playing a version of an Agatha Christie. I don't know if Christie sort of wrote herself in this story, but that's very much what it feels like.
I'm not familiar with the source material, but I think that is a pretty good estimation.
Yeah, so this is a person who's written a series of mystery novels based on the crimes that Poirot has solved, and she wants to sell more books, so she wants to get him excited about the idea of solving another mystery. She tells him she knows of a place in Venice where around Halloween, these kids like to come and congregate, but there's also been murders supposedly taken place there. And then there's a medium, Mrs. Reynolds, played by Michelle Yeoh, who is supposed to come and do a seance that night. And she wants to bring Poirot there to witness what's happening and see if he can figure it out or debunk it, or maybe even have him convinced that there is life after death. Or something actually supernatural going on.
She comes to him with the premise of, you need to debunk this medium because I'm the smartest person I know and I can't figure out what she's doing. So I need you to do it. Or is she just legit? Like, he's kind of there as the Scully, like, the skeptic who is meant to disprove her with science.
Right. And he is very much a staunch skeptic and atheist and finds no reason to believe that there should be anything else. But even he starts to question himself when he starts to see weird things or hear weird things or whatever. Mm-hmm. And throughout the night, there is foul play that occurs. And Poirot locks everybody inside, everybody who could be a suspect, and starts to question them one by one, like he would his old mysteries when he was not retired, and tries to figure out, get to the bottom of what's actually going on and who's a suspect and who isn't. So this is a classic whodunit.
And the Poirot mysteries are kind of the template for that, right? Like,
sure.
Like he as a character is this traveling detective who solves mysteries. He's kind of Sherlock Holmesian, which later gets translated into a character like Batman. So it's just like, this is just one of his cases.
And most recently, the character Benoit Blanc from the Knives Out movies are very much based sort of on this archetype.
Absolutely. This detective who done it.
She wrote.
Murder mystery.
Yeah.
Columbo, all of it. Yeah.
It's archetypal.
Poirot as a character is one of the reasons it is archetypal. Like, he's been around that long.
Right.
That he is one of the blueprints. I'm not going to say the only one, because there was obviously, this is a whole genre. But him as a character is one of the more famous in this.
Yeah, I would say between Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle, they really kind of set this up as a tradition. And then
for sure.
the early serials that were made sort of based on this type of pulp narrative.
And now we're in a little bit more of a postmodern take on it, but this is, as a movie, as a structure goes, very traditional. It's very...
Yeah, I would say there's nothing very postmodern about this approach, which is...
No, this is... Yeah.
Actually commendable. I sort of appreciated that. I think in a post-Knives Out world, it would be really easy for Branagh or whoever's directing this to play with the tropes more, or wink at the camera more. And there's a little bit of humor here, especially from Tina Fey, who seems to be the major source of comedic relief, insofar as that there is comedic relief.
But it's not ironic humor. It's never. It's never at the sake of the character and the genre. It's always within the context of the reality they've established. It's not really winking at the camera or anything like that. And I mean, if we're getting into it, that's one of the things I appreciate about it, is it's not done with a cynical eye.
No.
It is very much like, we are going to try to honor this genre and play it as straight as possible.
But if you look at Branagh and his history in film, that's sort of what he does. Like, he first made his name being one of the premier guys to do Shakespeare adaptations for film. He did a version of Hamlet.
His directorial debut was Henry V.
Yeah.
He did Hamlet, Love Labor's Lost.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, As You Like It. Damn, yeah, he's done some Shakespeare. This isn't Shakespeare, but he also did a version of Frankenstein.
Right.
That plays it very earnestly, very...
And he also does, he kind of does everything from the perspective of, like, a theater kind of guy. Like, even if you look at his adaptation of the first Thor movie for Marvel, they brought him on because they wanted him to bring that sort of earnestness and that Shakespearean heft to the
gravitas, yeah.
To the mythology of the Norse gods.
That one is a little more tongue-in-cheek than I think he typically goes for, but
sure.
But yes, it is this idea of, you know, he plays all the Norse mythology stuff as straight as you possibly could have in like 2010 or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's a much bigger project and a for hire gig, so he didn't quite have as much creative control as he would on other projects, like, say, these movies or Belfast or his Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. But that is kind of what he does. His version of Frankenstein, you know, very much Victorian Gothic, same as this film.
Well, there's a real this appreciation of literature, right, within his work, and theater. And theater nerd. Yeah, like, you know, I get it. You know, if how many fucking I have a theater degree. How many people do I know, if they were given a mass budget, would be like, no, we got to get this right. We got to get this like as close to the source material as possible. And that's what I mean. Like it feels like this is just sort of a retirement project for him. Is like, well, I don't want to quit, but I'm just gonna... I've earned the money and the goodwill to just keep making fucking Poirot movies till I'm dead.
Yes, I agree with you, but it's kind of an interesting two-handed situation here, because on one hand, it feels sort of like he's making these movies for himself, because who is this for, really? Is there a big clamoring for adaptations of Hercule Poirot? I mean, one might think, given the success of the Knives Out movies and whatnot, that there could be some sort of appetite for this.
Well, but I think he's also, if that is the case, he is helping to drive that, right? Like,
sure, and he knows that his name is going to bring that, and he has a vision for what he would do for it. But
yeah.
Yes, so there's that aspect of it where it's like there's these very traditional whodunit mysteries that are not... they're stylish, but not particularly flashy, and they're not big budget, you know, capes and spandex and robots exploding affairs. This is somewhat counterintuitive to what we would think of as a successful blockbuster series. His approach to it is purely through the exploration and appreciation of genre for its own sake. This, you know, I've heard some people make this distinction, and it's mostly in jest, but, you know, the difference between a movie and a film. Like, I've heard Steven Soderbergh say, like, you know, when he made the Shay movies, or when he made the Shay projects, those were films. And when he made No Sudden Move, that was a movie. Or Contagion was a movie. You know, and he's joking, obviously. But Branagh's approach to this is, I'm making movies. This is for popcorn.
Yes, absolutely. Like, it is an appreciation of the literature and the source, but it's
not high art.
It is meant to be as palatable and as, you know, multi-demographic as you can make something like this. It almost feels like a personal challenge of his to be like, I'm going to take this sort of, something that could be considered this kind of dusty material and make it as pop as possible.
Yeah, is there still sort of a pop culture cachet in
because these
what used
movies
to be
are
considered pulp?
Yes, and because these movies are slick and stylish and
star-studded.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think after watching Haunting in Venice, I went back and revisited Death on the Nile. I have yet to watch Murder on the Orient Express. I couldn't watch it when I was doing the production. It was too weird. And then, but whatever. I'll get to it eventually. But Death on the Nile is so big and flashy, and with that one specifically, he is trying to make it a blockbuster, and didn't appreciate how much he was kind of restraining that instinct in this movie until after I saw Death on the Nile. Like, if you watch them concordantly, you can see, like, oh, he learned some lessons. Like, there is some stuff that like an overt use of CGI and weird set pieces, and this feels very restrained and very sort of back to form
and naturalistic.
Yeah, and I appreciated that much more after seeing how kind of big he can try to make it.
So, Death on the Nile. Now, this is the only one of the three I've seen so far. So, Death on the Nile was kind of like his Temple of Doom.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen Murder on the Orient Express, but I think that is a pretty apt metaphor.
I say that as a Temple of Doom apologist, but...
I mean, yeah, Temple of Doom's a lot of fun, but no one will say that's the best Indiana Jones.
No, certainly not.
Yeah, Temple, sorry.
And it's a little overproduced and a little too into itself.
Yes, that is absolutely Death on the Nile. Like, it is as big as it can be. It's bombastic. It has just all of these strange sort of effects shots that you would not need for a chamber piece, which, these are literally chamber pieces. That's where the term comes from. So, and again, I didn't notice this when I was watching Haunting of Venice, but then upon checking out Death on the Nile, I was like, oh, okay, he was pulling it back. This is sort of a back to basic. I think Death of the Nile was maybe unfairly maligned. It has a pretty weak first act, but once it gets into the murder mystery stuff, it's similar to this. And that's when you can see the real directorial style coming through.
Yeah. Now, I will say, given the fact that this movie does have limited staging, and limited sets. I mean, very lavish sets, but not. It's not other than a few wide shots we get of Venice and things like that. For the most part, it's all one setting, as a chamber piece should be.
Well, and it's. But yeah, it's not driven by these sort of forced set pieces, right? Like, it's for the most part in one location.
And it's a lot of dialogue, and it's a lot of people sort of standing in rooms trying to figure things out and whatnot. I mean, there's a few kind of horror movie set pieces, but for the most part, it's all about the investigation. But I will say, given that, it doesn't feel stagey in a theater sort of way. Like, he does a really good job of doing interesting camera work or finding interest, like paranoid camera, POV shots, kind of placing things where you wouldn't initially think how to stage a certain dialogue set piece just to keep things activated and keep things visual. Yeah. The lighting is and color correction is really nice, and the movie looks pretty good.
I mean, so does Death on the Nile, except for some fucking questionable digital effects and green screen shit. But this one I appreciated because, like I said, it didn't have that. And it felt like I liked his approach to this as if Hercule Poirot was in a horror movie. Right. And I think that was kind of the selling point for me. Okay, well, it's a skeptic in a haunting scenario, and we're going to treat it like a horror movie, but we're also going to be true to the detective genre and let that play out. I'm not going to say dueling genres, but like letting them come together.
Right. I mean, there's always an aspect to the whodunit, especially murder mysteries, of the macabre and of the Gothic,
Well, and a lot of early slashers have a sort of murder mystery element to them then, the focus sort of shifts more to the violence and the
exploitation. Yeah.
And
this movie's kind of pre all that.
Yes.
So, but I mean, when it comes to like the Halloween setting and the milieu of it all, and even like some possession scenes, if you will, or what have you, the movie plays around with the macabre and with the horror, even if it's not directly a horror film.
This movie has vibes for days, and I actually think that this would be like, this is a great movie for people who like Halloween stuff, but aren't into horror, but are too afraid of like the big scares or gore fest or stuff like that. Like, I think there's something cool about that, and oftentimes when I think of murder mystery as a genre, I want the vibes. Like, give me the vibes, and oftentimes it actually underdelivers. So I think there's a lot that the setting is doing for this. I think there's a lot that the premise of, is this actually a haunting or a murder mystery, just really feeds into both genres really well and makes it a lot of fun.
Now, with that said, I love everything about this movie except for the nuts and bolts of it.
No, I agree with you. I like the actual plot of it is kind of predictable
and cumbersome,
it's a little rote.
Yeah. And right. I mean, I won't say that I had it figured out from the very beginning, but it wasn't too difficult to figure out at least who the key players were.
It's like, it doesn't blow your mind. Once the reveal happens, you're like, oh, that's kind of it.
Well, the reason why I feel like this genre is really difficult to impress me, I mean, for somebody, people who love reading this type of fiction, this is probably going to just be heaven for them. But the reason why, in general, I don't really run towards this is because it's often, even like your Raymond Chandler stuff or whatever, it's always red herring, red herring, red herring, red herring.
Actual clue.
Yeah, they might give
red herring,
you
actual clue.
Yeah. But the actual clues never. They also don't give you enough leverage as a viewer to piece it together as you're watching it. So you feel like you're doing all this work with the movie to try and figure things out. And then in the last big reveal, the big speech, the monologue of the detective, he lays out like this huge dossier of information, and that's like
It's technically there, but you as a viewer would have no way to actually figure out the mystery.
Right. So, I mean, to me, there's no point in it as a mystery because you would have to have known what was happening for years and weeks prior to the events of the story. There's not enough there to draw me in. And I think certain modern noirs and mysteries and things like that do a little better of a job of giving you just enough to keep you included as a viewer into the mystery. Whereas this is just like, well, here's, this huge monologue where I lay out this whole other plot that has nothing to do with what you just watched for the last 2 hours.
I will say, I think that is one of the reasons Murder on the Orient Express as a piece has lasted, whereas a lot of this other sort of genre stuff falls off, because I do feel like you're a lot more rewarded as the viewer or reader as detective. Because I feel like the mystery is laid out in a way that is a little bit more satisfying. Whereas in this case, and similar with Death on the Nile, I agree. It's like, it's kind of a letdown once you have it all laid out in front of you. It's like, oh, that's it? There's all this buildup and that, okay. And I think that is one of the reasons why it, as a postmodern genre, has been more effective. In the case of, like, the Knives Out mysteries, they can specifically write to that. They can right. build a climax that is meant for a modern sensibility, whereas this is not. The story was meant, as a pulp sort of dime novel reader mystery. And right. through the adaptations, I think, in this case, I agree with you. I think the actual plot of it is the weakest part.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's enough stylistically going on. And
and all the characters and actors are great.
Yeah, the performances are all there and very strong, even if they're, doing way more than what they're asked to do on screen. I think all the actors are bringing something interesting. And, Branagh himself as Poirot is fun and protagonist to follow, especially in this context. The actual plot of it all, I kind of don't care. Like, when it's all said and done, yes. It's like, I guess, sure, you can write your own check at the end.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of the problem with murder mystery, like, as a genre, right? Like, I used to do this show, an improvised show called Book Club, and we would, like, improvise different genres, and we did an improvised murder mystery, and literally the idea of it is, at the end, it could be anyone, and you just have to justify it in a way, and when you're familiar enough with it as a genre, like, you can really see those pieces of, oh, yeah, it literally can be anyone. It's just, Occam's razor, and
I don't think that I think this goes well beyond Occam's razor. I mean, the situation that they use to justify everything in the story is, like, well beyond the simplest common denominator.
I mean, yes and no. Yes and no. There's details that are more complicated, but if you really think about the concept of Occam's razor, this actually fits pretty well. And I don't want to say too much without a spoiler warning, but
right.
But I agree with you. This movie's stylish. It's cool. The plot, especially in the third act, is a little okay.
Is there any performances that stood out to you beyond the leads?
this might be controversial.
There's a lot of people in the movie.
There are a lot of people in the movie. This might be controversial for diehard Poirot stans because Kenneth Branagh on paper does not fit the role, but after seeing 2 of the movies, I can see him acting his way into it, if that makes sense. And I think he earns it. I actually am very into his performance as Poirot.
Yeah, I think he's great in it.
I really like Tina Fey. I really like
fun.
Well, I like seeing her again play something a little more earnestly. Like this is an actual part that isn't just meant to be comedy, and it's not just meant to be kind of making fun of itself. Like she really leans into that.
Jamie Dornan was actually really good in the few scenes he had.
I agree.
He had one monologue in particular where he's really pushing through a lot of emotion, and again, it's like. For such a silly movie, he's acting the hell out of it.
Well, and that's something, again, I appreciate as and I think that's a lot of the sort of source material genre stuff, is these characters are well written enough that if you have good actors, they will be able to bring stuff out of it in a way that you don't get in a lot of ensemble casts anymore.
Mm-hmm. I thought Jude Hill as the younger boy, the precocious kid who's reading murder literature.
I really liked him.
He was fun. Yeah.
Everybody else is, I think, reliable as always.
And they do a good enough job at kind of giving everybody a reason to be a suspect.
Yeah.
That it keeps you guessing long enough. But I mean, if you're pretty in on the know on how these type of stories write themselves, your best guess is probably right.
Well, also,
I'll say that.
Like, the mystery does need to unfold itself. And there are developments, there are twists, like, that's part of the genre. Yeah. So, and when he's interviewing people one-on-one, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, they fucking did it. And that's the point. Like,
yeah,
the writers want you to think that immediately.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate that even if it's a little corny, or even if it's a little overdone, or we're a little annulled to this type of fiction in our day and age, or whatever, I appreciate that Branagh wants to pluck us out from where we are and put us right back into when these stories were published, and to just enjoy them on their own terms.
Absolutely. I appreciate that he's such a nerd about it that he's like, I want to treat this with as much respect as possible, and does it from this place of earnestness, that you can, it can't help but win me over a little bit with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm giving it a B.
Yeah. No, I think B, that's my score as well.
Yeah.
After seeing Death on the Nile, I would probably give it a B+. But my initial reaction was a B. I do think it is the better of the two. But I enjoyed both enough that I'm gonna eventually check out Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah, I'm interested enough now, having seen this one, to see the other two. But, for people who haven't seen it yet, unless you're already a big fan of this type of fiction, I would say it's not a run out and see kind of movie. I would say catch it on a matinee kind of vibe.
Also, I think the marketing might draw in a wrong audience because I think the marketing has leaned pretty heavily into the horror of it, and it's not a horror movie. It is a murder mystery that is directed like a horror movie. Yeah, so I think some people, if you go to it with the wrong mindset, might be dissatisfied.
Yeah, it's not like a scare-a-minute. But I will say that it's spooky. It's good for this season, like right now. Like, you know, I was glad I watched it.
It's a great kickoff to Halloween, but like if you're going expecting a ghost movie, you're not going to get that.
Unless you do.
Ooh.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about the movie news. We have a few stories that have popped up. The big story that I wanted to get to before we get to a few smaller ones is that the WGA has seemingly settled.
No, officially. The strike, and as of the recording of this, I believe the contracts have been signed. It is officially a done deal.
So I looked into some of the actual details of what they were able to negotiate. And if you want to go back a few episodes and listen to our episode with Alec, he was talking about some of these things when they were still sort of being discussed. But these are sort of the terms that they've agreed to. Here on the WGA's website, WGAcontract2023.org, it lays out their terms of agreement. So I'll try and get through these as quickly as possible. I probably won't read everything. But it says here, most MBA minimums will be increased by 5% on ratification of a contract, 4%. On such and such date, 3.5%. So there's some minimums. Let's talk about some of the stuff that we were really interested in. Artificial intelligence. I think that's a big one. Mm-hmm. So for how AI can be used in writing, it says AI can't write or rewrite literary material, and AI-generated material will not be considered source material under the MBA, meaning that AI-generated material can't be used to undermine a writer's credit or separate rights. A writer can choose to use AI when performing writing services if the company consents and provided that the writer follows applicable company policies, but the company can't require the writer to use AI software such as ChatGPT when performing writing services. So the company must disclose to the writer if any materials given to the writer have been generated by AI or incorporated AI material. And the WGA reserves the right to assert that exploitation of writers' material to train AI is prohibited by MBA or other law.
That's a big one. Yeah, that ending there. I mean, I feel like they could have gone a little harder on AI because I just, for me, it's kind of like a just no, ever. But what I like about this is it sets it up to where a lot of the control is within the writer's responsibility, and
there's a level of disclosure.
Yes, I think
has to be included.
Well, overall, I think that is one of the biggest things with this deal, with the strike, with everything, right? Is this idea of disclosure of AI-generated materials, the disclosure of streaming numbers, like just the idea that these studios can't be withholding information the way that they have been in the past.
So there's some compensation minimums that have been added. I'm trying to find where they talked about development rooms. Here it is.
The mini rooms?
Yeah. So development rooms, aka pre-greenlit rooms and regular writers' rooms for television and HSB VOD series will now have requirements regarding the minimum number of writers who must be hired and the duration of their employment. These new provisions go into effect for seasons where the first episode is written after December 1st, 2023, assuming ratification in October, which apparently that has been done. So for post-greenlit rooms, the following requirements are triggered dependent on the number of episodes ordered, unless a single writer is engaged to write all episodes. They include a table there. Writers in production for single camera series made for HSB VOD or paid TV that are exclusively filmed in the US and Canada, 2 writer-producers must be employed for the lesser of 20 weeks of production or the duration of the production, along with the showrunner.
Well, so that was a big part of the whole mini room thing, right? Is they would hire a small staff of writers to do development, and then essentially there was like a high turnover rate. And these writers weren't getting these sort of minimums, needed to sustain a career. And that was a big sticking point, is like, if you're hiring us for a writing room, it's got to be for a writing room. Like, you can't just be hiring us as these sort of like ad hoc, again, mini rooms to keep us from, fulfilling our contractual agreements. So that was a huge win overall, it seems like the Writers Guild won most of the big sticking points that they wanted.
Yeah, I can't find it in this exact article, but I believe I read somewhere else that they are now, streamers have to disclose what the per streams are for per episode. Whereas before that all could be a mystery. For all you knew, your show was doing fantastically well, but somebody canceled it because they didn't like you. You know, or whatever. Or they bumped you for something else.
If your show's doing well, you should know that. If it's not doing well, you should know that.
This is what I read before. It says, under the new writers' agreement, studios will have to provide streaming data to the WGA under NDA. They must provide the worldwide total number of hours streamed, and the WGA is then allowed to share the info with members in aggregated form. So that's huge.
That's huge. I mean,
because before
that
it was
information
just a total
has been
mystery.
Of all the things, that's one of the ones that I'm the most surprised they gave on. But clearly, the AMPTP was just absolutely losing the PR campaign. It does not surprise me that the contract that they came forward with was favorable for what the WGA was asking. It kind of surprised me how favorable it was. They were really coming into crunch time, because we got to the point to where movies that were supposed to be out at the end of this year were now getting pushed to next year, just so that they would have stuff to release, because we were starting to run out of time for new projects to get greenlit. Well, also, I think, some of that was a I think some of that was a tactic on AMPTP's side, delaying a big release like Dune was
Yeah.
I think it was meant to be a statement of like, no, that's fine. We got this in the bank. Like, we don't mind waiting to delay. How long can you guys last? And, hopefully alongside the WGA, hopefully they come to the table with, good faith negotiating terms for SAG-AFTRA because, unfortunately, the industry can't move forward until that is resolved as well. But
I mean, it seems like this is going to be the windfall because all of these unions are sort of working in tandem. They're taking notes from each other.
Absolutely.
And
it's like, I think the biggest show of solidarity in the Hollywood industry, and a lot of that is because of social media. It's because of, the ability to organize and transparency that due to technology has not been available in this form before. Mm-hmm. So I don't see the actors' strike lasting much longer.
I don't either, especially now that this one has kind of come and went. So, currently right now, the actors' strike is still going on, but I think we're probably going to be tapering off all of that.
It would not be surprised. It would not surprise me if it was resolved by the time this is released. Like, legally, there's sort of an order that they have to do these things in, but I can't see them holding out at this point for the Actors Guild. The group of people that is most often seen as the quote-unquote talent, I can't see them having to wait much longer to
they can't, at this point, the actors can't even go on to the night shows or whatever to promote their projects.
No,
so
exactly. You have the night shows back, but what are they going to promote? Exactly. It's that's what I'm saying. I think it will be resolved within a couple weeks at most.
Okay, so one of the smaller stories has come out. This is a little rumor mill, but this was all over Twitter, so there might be, and the story wasn't like immediately discredited. But it says, according to Mr. Rumi, Christopher Nolan is in talks to direct and write at least 2 James Bond films. They'd be true to Fleming's adaptations set in the period they were written.
I am calling such bullshit on this. Mm. I think it is such a... I feel like Christopher Nolan has made his Bond movie, right? Like, he made Tenet. He's made...
Oh, he's been trying to make it since he did Batman Begins.
Absolutely. But now with... Post Oppenheimer, I feel like, to me, it would seem like a backstep for Nolan.
I don't think for him it would.
No, I do. To me, this sounds like such a... I don't know. This sounds like such a rumor to me. I put very little stock in this.
Well,
I mean...
Mr. Rumi, it was who they're... accrediting this source, is the editor-in-chief of World of Real. So he's a movie journo. But, I don't know. I would not be surprised. I think he could make the great American film, or whatever. He could win the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival, then go on to win the Oscar with something original. And then if Bond came knocking, he would still answer, because I think he has a little Bond dork inside of him that knows what Bond movie he wants to make, and I think he's going to feed the Bond dork.
I'm skeptical. I know.
Now, I did see one point that I thought was... that I agreed with. It was somebody on Twitter. I forget who.
Well, is it the Broccolis? So James Bond as a property is owned by the Broccoli.
Oh,
estate.
yeah, the estate. Yeah, no,
and they are very notorious in
being very
the
protective.
amount of control that they exert over the way James Bond is portrayed, and such and such and such and such. And I think that where Christopher Nolan is as a director right now, post Oppenheimer, I think it would be difficult to work within the creative constraints that the Broccolis might present. What were you going to say?
I don't think so. I think depending on what he wanted to do, I don't think he's going to try and turn it into a time travel, mind fuck. I think he would just want to do some of his favorite Bond stories,
I think it's just because they had a sex scene in Oppenheimer and they're like, oh, he can do the sex. Okay, now he can do Bond.
Which
he
is
had
arguable,
everything but
actually.
the sex.
Which is arguable. No, the point that I saw that I kind of agreed with, which is more just sort of a critical point, was that Skyfall by Sam Mendes was already sort of basically what it would be like if Christopher Nolan did a Bond movie. And so it'd be kind of redundant to see Bond done by actually Christopher Nolan. I
think that they are ships passing in the night. I think the time for Christopher Nolan to do a Bond movie would have been like 2016. I think now he is sort of past it, and I think they are going to be looking into rebooting another franchise run, because that's what Bond does. I just can't see them genuinely entertaining the idea of doing a 2-picture period piece. That just doesn't seem like what the Bond franchise has ever been about. They've always tried to keep it fairly modern, but in its own, in its own genre.
Its own headcanon. Yeah.
Yeah, what I think they're going to want to do is they're going to want to get a young actor who's going to be attached to like a 4 or 5 year, 4 or 5 movie contract, and the directors are going to be a little more work for hire. That's kind of how Bond has always been. So I am not putting a lot of stock in this.
If I were to have my vote, I would want to see Duncan Jones take over.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Okay, the other
that
story...
makes way more sense to me. Just like where everybody's at in their career and where it is in the cultural zeitgeist, that clicks in a way that I just think Christopher Nolan's too big.
I don't think there's such a thing as too big.
He made almost $1 billion off of a biopic. Off of almost his name alone. Like, mm-hmm. I think I can see why there would be interest. I think it would be wrapped up in production hell, and there would just be too many sort of conflicting visions that by the end of it, it'll just sort of fade away.
All right. The other story is Warner Brothers has had conversations recently about developing a Rick and Morty movie. Speaking of redundant, given that Rick and Morty is based on Doc and Marty from Back to the Future. Also, there's the whole Justin Roiland issue.
Yeah. Well, it's not an issue. They fired him. He's done.
But they're still running the show, and they say they can run it forever. They're talking like Simpsons level forever.
Yeah. Actually, I think without Justin Roiland attached to it, it has way more potential. Mm. I think he was kind of slowing things down because he was the star. He was doing like 60% of the voice characters. I don't know if you've seen the trailer for Rick and Morty, the new season. The first post-Justin season. They just revealed the trailer. For anybody who's not aware of the situation, they won't miss a beat. Like, the voices sound so much the same that, like, yeah. I'm sorry. I just, to me, they're indistinguishable. Like, I get that
they're not the hardest cartoon voices to do.
No, to me, it's kind of funny how replaceable he seems right now. I saw somebody tweet, like, everybody has at least 2 friends within their group that can do all the voices on Rick and Morty. And I think that's the case. So I think the show has only been getting better as it's been going on, as they've looped in more writers, as it's become more detached from sort of the original concept of what if, Back to the Future, but Doc Brown was a raging alcoholic and a cynical asshole, and Marty was a horny teenager. Like,
yeah,
I think it has progressed so far beyond the first season that I'm here for it. Like, until it starts slipping with animation, generally, I'm like, yeah, let's see where we can go. I think a movie actually makes a lot of sense with Rick and Morty. It's always been more cinematic than a lot of adult cartoons. And I think they could do something on a scale that would be worthy of a motion picture. Whereas a lot of other adult cartoons, it's like, okay, well, this is a family sitcom, but the movie version, this is like, no, it makes sense. They've always played with genre and these high sort of sci-fi concepts, and I think it would be really fun to see what they could do with a movie budget.
Yeah, so I was looking over the article to see if they were talking a live-action version or if they were talking just an extended animated episode, basically. Like
I would assume, yeah, animated.
Like the Simpsons movie or the Bob's Burgers movie. And that's probably what they're talking about. If I'm being 100, if I'm being $1.50, I've never been the biggest Rick and Morty guy. I gave it a shot. I watched like a season and a half and I was nonplussed by most of it. I thought it was like nerd shit 101. It was like Robot Chicken level humor, but with okay animation and sort of obnoxious characters. Now, I hear it got better beyond that point, but I just didn't care enough to follow up with it.
That's all. I think all of your assessment is pretty fair.
Also, I always kind of thought it was like poor man's Venture Brothers.
That I definitely agree with. I think Venture Brothers has always been more tapped into the genre parody without feeling like parody. And yeah. I think that Rick and Morty more often than not leads into
pastiche.
And pastiche and peeling back the breaking the fourth wall. Like, they'll literally call genre tropes out as genre tropes. And I think something like Venture Brothers, where they totally buy into the reality 100%, is always going to be more satisfying.
And when they are pulling from things, it's from really unexpected, weird sources. Like having David Bowie and Klaus Nomi be
but they also guys. They also do it in a way where it's like, yeah, that's actually David Bowie.
Right.
And he just happened to be, the sovereign. Like, they do it in a way that is less tongue-in-cheek, less... Yeah, there's no winking at the camera. It's like all of the stuff exists in universe, whereas Rick and Morty is like, there's an awareness that it's a TV show. That being said, I think it does pick up. I want to say like around the end of the second season, third season, because I agree with you. I think the first little bit is kind of whatever. It's it's kind of just sort of like if you like Futurama, you'll probably like this.
Okay, yeah, and I would assume it's been going on for years and years, so I would assume that would be the case.
This is the 7th season, I think.
Yeah, but I also had similar issues when Community started. I just kind of think there's sort of a Dan Harmon thing where he always goes for the low-hanging fruit of whatever he's doing, and I'm always just kind of like, okay, like, I was making these jokes in middle school. Like, you just gave it a budget.
I mean, kudos to him for doing that, for finding the people to make money off of it. But, yeah. But I agree. I also wasn't that into Community. I think, Community, I think, had like maybe 2.5 good seasons out of a 5-season run. I have always preferred Rick and Morty, though. I think it finds itself in a way that Community couldn't because of other production issues. Like once Community really found its voice, it started falling apart.
Right, yeah. Which is a whole separate issue.
Yeah, but yeah. I feel like Rick and Morty is the writers they have right now, and I really think they haven't released the post-Roiland season yet, but based off the trailer, I think it seems like they're shaking off some dead weight.
All right, well, that is all I have for the movie news, so we can go ahead now and start talking about the ice storm, which is our homework. Had I known that we were going to be heading into October with this episode, I would have made it a little bit more appropriate, but
yeah, this is a Thanksgiving movie.
It's very much so, yes.
It's literally, like takes place over the Thanksgiving holiday.
But yeah, why don't you go ahead and describe the goings-on of this film?
So the ice storm is about a couple of families that are neighbors with within small radius in Connecticut. Families consist of Kevin Kline, Joan Allen, Sigourney Weaver, Tobey Maguire, Christina Ricci, Elijah Wood, and Jamie Sheridan make up these two families, within the suburban environment. People are growing up and moving on. Tobey Maguire is at a private school. He is brother to Christina Ricci. Their parents are Joan Allen and Kevin Kline, who are, after many years of marriage, sort of hitting an icy patch. Pun very much intended. Their marriage is a little rocky, and Kevin Kline has been having an affair with the neighbor, Sigourney Weaver, who is the mother of Elijah Wood and Adam Hahn Bird. Their father seems to be traveling a lot for business. As suburban families are, these families are close. They hang out, they have parties, all the kids know each other. Christina Ricci and Elijah Wood are kind of hooking up, as well as her developing a strange relationship with the younger brother. and all of these sort of individual family dramas start to come to a head the night after Thanksgiving, where an ice storm comes into town and has unintended consequences for the evening.
Yeah, it sort of forces everybody into these difficult conversations or these difficult realities they otherwise have been trying to ignore.
Yeah.
So this is directed by Ang Lee. This is a movie that was one of many that, built him up in a big way in American filmmaking. And it takes place in the 70s. This was released in 97. And in the mid-90s, there was a sort of a fascination with 70s nostalgia.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. You have a lot of these sort of younger directors who are now coming into the industry, and they're, sort of portraying the time period that they're familiar with. It's like why there's kind of a fascination with 80s and 90s culture in movies today. Like, it just makes sense. In 15 years, you're going to have Gen Z directors who are depicting post 9/11 life, which will be weird.
I think we've already sort of started to see that. I mean, Lady Bird takes place in it takes place in 2002 or something.
No, yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but the idea of when does a period film become a period film instead of a contemporary?
I guess it's
film.
more like once, because right now our generation is sort of taking over filmmaking. Once the younger generation completely sort of takes that over, that will be strange.
Yeah. But, Ang Lee not being an American filmmaker and making a very specifically American story about a very specific type of American family, these sort of upper middle class Connecticut collegiate upper crust folk who
suburbanites,
are living, suburbanites living outside of the city areas, but who are, and this is on the eve of the Watergate scandal. So there's that's happening in the background, which is kind of this idea of lies and secrets being revealed. It's sort of a theme that sort of comes up in the story.
And Christina Ricci, specifically, she's sort of playing this young liberal, who's always sort of trying to stay in touch with the news, where a lot, there also this movie is talking about this sort of generational differences, the differences with relationships and specifically sexual relationships.
Right. But this is post the hippie era, and you kind of get the idea that, these people, they sort of missed out on the hippie era because they were going to college and because they're very well off.
But they're a little more sexually adventurous. They're kind of trying it on parties, and
they're sort of trying it on like an outfit. All the cool people from LA have these key parties and are trying swinging, and maybe we're sexually liberated, even though everybody just does not seem comfortable with it when they're dealing with the realities of the situation.
Well, when dealing with the emotional reality of, a marriage with multiple children and neighbors that you've been friends with for years, sex is going to complicate that.
Yeah, and the free love does not actually manifest itself as being particularly free. It feels very much like people sort of jockeying for position. But
it's funny because I think there's kind of a similar thing with that now with the idea of open relationships. And I'm not saying that all open relationships are like this. Like, obviously, people can define relationships on their own terms, and I'm sure some open relationships are very successful. But especially with Kevin Kline, his character, there's this sort of idea of the guy who wants to be outside of his marriage because he thinks he sort of has a sexual currency that doesn't exist. But as soon as that sort of turns the tables, it makes him uncomfortable. Like, again, when you're dealing with relationships and sex and love, like, shit gets complicated. And when you have
when you have kids involved, especially kids who know each other.
15, 20-year history, yeah.
What I like about the movie, and what I think it sort of harkens back to sort of like the Circean melodramas. Even though they could never be as lurid or as frank about these subjects, it sort of builds on those sort of premises of, internal familial angst and, the roles and positions that society tries to box you in, and how comfortable are you with them, and how comfortable are you stepping away from them, and what have you. So it's sort of like those kind of melodramas sort of filtered through sort of the sensibility of like 70s filmmakers like Robert Altman or Paul Mazursky. I thought a lot about his films. And the guy who made Harold and Maude.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
It's not coming to mind, but that filmmaker as well. They were all kind of, they grew up on those like melodramas and were sort of like doing their version of it through like the countercultural lens. And this is sort of that through the lens of a non-American sort of looking in. You do get that sort of Eastern feel every once in a while of how, the storm itself sort of comes to symbolize the internal pressures of these families. And there's a little bit more cinematic poetry than you would normally get in like a gritty 70s melodrama or a 50s overwrought melodrama. But yeah, I think that there's definitely sort of a conversation within a conversation within a conversation happening here.
Yeah, but on top of that, I definitely agree with what you're saying about this sort of filmic poetry that does have this sort of Eastern sensibility. But I feel like as far as a melodrama goes, there could be more drama. A lot of these sort of stories don't necessarily come to sort of a head the way that you would think they will. There are times when some of the characters are a little too rational and a little too... There are conversations that seemingly resolve and diffuse situations in a way that I do think betrays the genre a little bit. Like, I think there could have played into that a little bit more. I think there's this interesting sort of tug-of-war with this movie between melodrama and naturalism. And I didn't always know which would win out.
I think I get what you're saying. I think the difference between, the traditional melodrama, which is all about, creating these high stakes emotional responses between the characters and then letting that play out. And then a movie like this is that you're dealing with characters that are repressed and also forcing themselves into a civility that's unnatural to the circumstance. And I think that's part of the story.
I agree with you. But I think that part of that is watching this movie, I wanted to see the characters change in a way that allowed them to sort of break out of that. And that kind of doesn't happen in any sort of satisfying way. But
I think by the third act, I mean, I'm not going to spoil, what happens, but I think that there is a moment of resolution where we know where our key players are sort of set back in the frame.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Or when things are contextualized for them and they're finally able to see through their own personal bullshit. Wants and desires, their own neurosis, and able to actually come together as a family unit, a functional family unit.
Yeah.
There's one big emotional release in the film that I think sort of supplants what would normally be multiple.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of that filtration process that happened there, because if you look at like the films from the 70s that were sort of influenced by the melodrama, like Hal Ashby being the director that I was trying to think of earlier, his movies or Paul Mazursky's Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice, which is like a swingers comedy of errors. You look at like that 70s sensibility, basically saying like there's no point in emotionally investing because it doesn't matter in the end anyways, because everybody's in for it for themselves, whether they want to be or not. And I think that Ang Lee is actually stepping in out of frame, out of the context of that American tradition and kind of taking that 70s cynicism and bringing in that metaphorical, say like, maybe there is something here that's worth fighting for, worth saving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I found the performances to be compelling throughout. I mean, Kevin Kline's been playing this guy his entire career.
But he also does it better than anybody else. This sort of pompous, collegiate, educated fool,
right?
Who's like book smart, but has literally no like. Again, it is so within his wheelhouse that he does it better than anybody else. Like I loved the sort of ongoing joke about how none of the women wanted to hear him talk. Like, please shut up for a minute.
Right. Yeah. Which is clearly all that he's really interested in. Is just kind of waxing philosophical and being heard.
Yeah.
And where he feels the most ignored. His Joan Allen as his wife is really good here.
I always confuse her with Michelle Fairley. Michelle Fairley, who most people would recognize as Catelyn Stark from Game of Thrones. They look identical to me.
So she did The Ice Storm in 97, and then she did Pleasantville, playing very similar character.
Yeah.
In a very similar role in 98. I mean, this is like...
Wasn't that also with Tobey Maguire?
Yeah. And I really enjoyed Tobey Maguire's relationship with Christina Ricci. They have this this very unique sort of, I don't know, they're in their own movie, like they're doing His Girl Friday.
Well, what's interesting is I think they only have one scene together, but they felt more familial than anybody else, and I think that was like really cool and really well done. Like there's this friendship between the siblings that literally does not translate to any single other character
or any other relationship in the movie.
Yeah.
It's the only place where they feel like they're equals or they're, intellectually capable of each other. And they're kind of like on the same wavelength. And they have this, this bond, this interesting bond. Like we hear them talk on the phone a couple times too. They refer to each other by different names and, I don't know. It was a fun relationship.
There's a shorthand between the characters that I appreciate. Both the script and the directors didn't need to elaborate on, just the way they play off of each other was really fun and natural.
Sigourney Weaver is great in this. All the principal leads are really good. I really liked even minor characters like Allison Janney in the movie.
Yeah, she's a lot of fun. Henry Czerny is great. A smaller part, but Jamie Sheridan, he is, I think, kind of underrated here. Most people would probably most people of our generation would probably recognize him as Randall Flagg from the TV miniseries in the 90s.
Right, yeah. He had like 2 scenes in the movie, but he's good. He's very good.
They're very powerful scenes, yeah.
David Krumholtz has a really small but impactful character, kind of playing against type. Is like he's the cool guy in the only universe where he would get to be the cool guy.
Yeah.
And even Adam Han Bird, who plays Elijah Wood's younger brother. I think the only other big movie he was in was Jumanji.
It was driving me nuts how I recognized him. But yeah, he plays the young Robin Williams in Jumanji.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's actually really good in this.
Yeah, and he gets a ton to do and some very difficult material to work around.
A lot of. Well, I mean, he's the youngest character, and he's sort of coming into age in a way that none of the other characters are, and he is more than anybody else still this boy who is wanting to transition to manhood, and there's some interesting situations that arise out of that.
Yeah.
Is this the hottest that Sigourney Weaver has ever been in a movie? Or is it just because I'm old now?
I think she's very good looking. This was a good time period for her.
She's still gorgeous. But I was like, damn, Sigourney Weaver, you could get it.
Oh, they know what they were doing. They cast her appropriately, and she's playing up to a type for sure. I mean,
absolutely.
And between this and Galaxy Quest, I would say, yeah.
Sigourney Weaver.
She's, Hollywood actress. She's beautiful.
You know what? She might be on my Mount Rushmore of crushes, now that I think about it. Have you seen the thing going around Twitter that's like, who's on your Mount Rushmore of crushes?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Might have to reevaluate that.
Might have to bump somebody for middle-aged Sigourney Weaver.
I think, yeah. I mean, my list is like Gillian Anderson and Cate Blanchett, so, Yeah, you
kind of have a thing, I think. Yeah, I recommend this movie. I mean, this movie's been well known for a long time. It was up for a bunch of awards when it first came out. There was a series of sort of this type of film at this time. I mentioned Pleasantville, but this, I would say, leads into where this crests with American Beauty.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is I feel like this develops into a more sort of Hollywood version with like American Beauty and Crash and like
Little Children.
And I think there's a more earnestness to this sort of time period for that, where it doesn't feel like awards baity in any way. It just feels like it's interested in exploring character and drama, and it's done, very competently with a great cast. And I agree. If you like,
I like the time period. I like the setting. We talked a little bit about the costume.
It almost feels like a Broadway, like it was translated from a script or something, like a Broadway play. Like
I know it's based on a book. There might have been a play. Let me see, actually,
because it just there's a few like scenes that and they're all sort of within these two houses. A couple of outdoor scenes, like it sort of feels that like sort of stage play script writing.
So there was a novel by Rick Moody, adapted by James Schamus, but I don't see anything about a play. But that doesn't mean there hasn't been since then. I would also say
I'll adapt it.
Go for it. I would also say that this feels sort of like a precursor, or I would be very surprised if this was not heavily researched when Noah Baumbach was writing The Squid and the Whale, because to me this movie feels very much in conversation with that.
I agree.
And
definitely like
the early.
Well, I mean, you can feel
stuff.
the influence of something like this on someone like Noah Baumbach, who is trying to sort of take it away from that sort of American Beauty-ness of it, from the blockbuster nature of it, right, and sort of strip it back down to the family genre. I think you can also feel that in Wes Anderson's earlier work, like The Royal Tenenbaums and Bottle Rocket.
And the stuff he wrote with Baumbach. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you can feel this kind of, this sort of Ivy League, dramaturge play, set as film.
Right. Not quite as satirical as those, but it sort of belongs in that camp, that world.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is that. And for next week, what are we going to be doing for the streaming homework?
We are going to be watching Layer of the White Worm. Layer of the White Worm, which is currently streaming on Tubi.
Yes, and it came out in 1988, and is a Ken Russell film I have not seen, so we'll get into that.
Cool.
And if anybody has anything to say about anything we've discussed on this episode or previous, you can reach out to us at our email at MacGuffinPod@gmail.com, or follow us on all of the social medias, Instagram and Twitter at MacGuffinPod. We're also on TikTok, and we have a YouTube channel at MacGuffinPod. Just in the search bar, look up MacGuffinPod, it'll pull it up. There's two different MacGuffins, because one's from when they were doing interviews with other directors and stuff, and then the other one's just the podcast. And we're on Letterboxd as well if you want to follow what we're watching for the streaming homeworks, or want to suggest something to us. You can do that as well. And be sure to leave us a star rating and a 1-sentence review on whatever your podcast app of choice is, whether it be Spotify or Google Podcasts or iTunes. Please leave us some sort of feedback there. And if you do watch one of our video versions of the podcast, they're time-stamped, so if you want to skip around or just watch certain reviews or whatever, you can. And be sure to leave a comment or a question or something there. Also, you can follow me individually at VC Cassidy on Twitter and Instagram. I'm also on Blue Sky. I'm also on Threads. I'm on whatever it's going to be next. Trying to figure this out, like the rest of us. If you haven't already, be sure to visit the MacGuff.in to read the other articles and reviews by the rest of the MacGuffin staff.
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I am also on Blue Sky at Keith Foster Kid. Also, I perform improv at Mockingbird Improv. I'm part of the shows Improv versus Stand-Up and Lyrics and Laughs. So, check out mockingbirdimprov.org for their calendar and schedule and come see a show.
Okay, and that is the end of the podcast.
It appears the living have been killed by a ghost, but I do not believe in such things.
That is quite the accent.
You know what? When we did Murder on the Orient Express, the cast and crew, we all went to, hang out at a bar after one of the shows, and one of the cast members' husband was French, and he said my accent was the best.
Okay.
It's been a while since I've done it.
Bye.